Have you ever watched a documentary that literally changed your life to the point where you started to think about the topic all the time and work to protect the animals in that documentary? Well, we have a perfect example of someone, Hannah Tait, who went through that same process by watching the Cove and wanted to protect dolphins so much so that she dedicated her life to going into dolphin protection, and now is the CEO of Action for Dolphins, an organization based in Melbourne, Australia. We're going to hear from her career track, what made her in the Cove decide, hey, let's start doing something, getting into advocacy and activism, and then becoming a CEO of a charity that has had an effect on the dolphin captivity in the Cove in Taiji, Japan. We're going to talk all about that with Hannah Tait today on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And today we're going to be talking about taking action, and we're going to be speaking to Hannah Tait, the CEO of a dolphin protection charity called Action for Dolphins. She's been working to protect dolphins and other marine life for close to 7 years, including campaigns to end cruel dolphin hunting, remove deadly shark nets, and end captivity and end harmful wild dolphin feeding. We're going to get into all of that. And I just think this is a clear story of how a documentary can motivate someone to take action, someone who doesn't even live in the country. Hannah watched the Cove when she was young, when she was in high school, and said, I am not going to stand for this. Started to do some activism at her school in high school and got other people involved and continued with that sort of mindset throughout her career. Her early career, went to university for communications and international communications and issues, and then started to really think about that, worked in other sort of avenues, and then found herself volunteering for the charity Action for Dolphins, and then eventually became CEO. That's a lot. There's a lot to unpack in there, and there's a lot of detail that I'm leaving out. So we're going to leave it up to Hannah Tait. But before we do, I want to let you know of a program that I continually run. It's called Build Your Career in Marine Science and Conservation. This is for the people just like Hannah who watch a documentary at whatever age they're in, at whatever age they are, and say, hey, you know what? I want to take part. I want to be an activist. I want to be a scientist. I want to be an ocean conservationist. And I need to know how to get to that place soon, whether you're just done university or you're on your way to be doing university or have been working in the field of anything. Anytime in the past 10 years, and you want to change and have a career in marine science and conservation, you can do so by signing up for our program, Build Your Marine Science and Conservation Career. It's a private podcast that gets published once a week. It's a monthly membership, but once a week you get an episode that either has a job ad that talks about how I would apply to that job ad, or it talks about strategy and tips on how to build a proper application, resume, prepare for an interview, network, and so forth. It's an amazing program. It's stuff that helped me get jobs when I was younger, and now I'm helping you get jobs and build a career as you get involved in marine science and conservation. So it's $5 to sign up, $5 a month to sign up. All you have to do is go to speakupforblue.com/career, and you are in right away. You get access to 25 episodes already published. All right, let's get into it with Hannah Tait. Here's Hannah Tait talking about her career and what she does at Action for Dolphins. Enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Hannah, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about protecting dolphins?
Always ready to talk about dolphins.
I love it. I'm excited because it's been a while since we talked about dolphins on this podcast. In fact, I have some friends who are shark biologists who are not particularly fond of dolphins. So it's I think because they're afraid they get too much hype, they get too much of the attention when people talk about oceans. Because when you always talk about somebody who wants to become a marine biologist, I want to work on dolphins, I want to work on whales, and I think some people get a little jealous of the dolphins. So we're going to talk about dolphins today because it's been a long time, and I'm super excited because we're talking about dolphins in Australia. And I think, as I was mentioning, Hannah, before we recorded, I think it's interesting how I never thought of dolphins in Australia. There's a lot of other animals I think of in Australia before I think of dolphins. So I'm really interested in finding out some of the things that are affecting dolphins and some of the conservation priorities in Australia for dolphins, as well as internationally. We're going to be talking about the Tait dolphin hunt and how we're seeing progress on there. And I think, Hannah, you have a little bit of an announcement to make too, in terms of a recent project that you had some success in. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Before we get into all of that, though, I just want, Hannah, if you can just introduce yourself to the audience, or just let us know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am the CEO with a Melbourne-based non-for-profit group called Action for Dolphins. We've been around for 11 years now, and we work on a range of issues, some of them you mentioned. So we work to end the Tait dolphin hunts, to end dolphin captivity, to stop the harmful practice of wild dolphin feeding here in Australia, and to remove deadly shark nets. And we've also done a few beach cleans here and there and do some broader work just to protect the dolphins' ocean home.
Amazing. That's a lot. That's a lot to take on, I have to admit, for an organization, but obviously very important things, and a lot of things that are affecting it locally. We hear of shark nets quite a bit in Australia, but never, you don't hear a lot about how it's affecting dolphins and other animals, for getting caught in those. So I'm looking forward to kind of diving into that. But before we get into that, I want to kind of get to know how you got involved with Action for Dolphins. Where did your passion for the oceans begin?
So my passion really started way back when I was in high school, and I watched the documentary The Cove, which I'm sure your listeners are well aware of, which was about the Tait dolphin hunts over in Japan. And yeah, I watched that with my sister. I was in year 9, and it just sparked something just clicked in me. It just sparked in me that I really wanted to try and do something about this. So I asked my year group to sit in the shape of a dolphin and held up a sign saying "Save Dolphins in Japan." And I just learnt more and more about the topic. And it was always something I was interested in throughout my university degree of international and global studies, and then media communications. Any assignment that I could relate back to issues with dolphins, like I also did another assignment on blackfish after that came out. Yeah, I would just try and bring it back because it was such a passion of mine. And then when I moved from Sydney to Melbourne was when I got involved with Action for Dolphins, as we're based down here. And I just started as a volunteer. I was mainly replying to social media comments and doing some community engagement work like that. And loved the people I was working with, loved the missions, and loved the way we went about it. So I've stuck around for 6.5 years, and about 2.5 years ago, I took over as CEO. And have just continued that real passion for the cause ever since.
I love it. I have a lot of questions in what you said there. So when you first, just going back to your year 9, after watching The Cove, and then you went to advocacy, you went, doing the sort of the event where you had everybody, line up in the shape of a dolphin. That takes a lot of courage to get to rally that many people around to be able to say, hey, let's stand up for dolphins. Now, the question I have, when somebody watches that movie, I guess you get that advocacy in you comes out. You want to protect the dolphins. But it was interesting to me that you went towards like internet, like global studies, international studies, and media and communications background. Did you ever have that want to become a marine biologist at that time, like after watching The Cove?
By that stage, I'd actually dropped science in school, and I'm a lot more art and English and communications focused. Gotcha. So I can wrap my head around scientific ideas, but what interests me more is then relaying those scientific ideas into a message for the wider public. And I've also worked in the cultured meat space, so making meat from animal cells, and that was a really similar role where I was translating complex science into a wider message in layman terms. So I've particularly interested in that comms and raising awareness space, but anything we do, any message you send out, of course, it has to be backed up by science. You can't just make stuff up.
Well, I love that. I asked that question for a reason, because my big, you've listened to this podcast before, and a lot of times what I say is like, you don't have to be a scientist to be in marine conservation, to be effective. And I'm always curious about the advocacy route, because I have to admit, I don't think I'm as brave as a lot of other people like yourself to come out and do these these events, and to kind of stand up towards, directly towards, or indirectly, however, wherever you are in the world, towards an issue like that. When you decide to do that, you're 9, you're probably what, 14 years old, 13, 14, 15 years old?
Yeah, about 15, I think. Yeah.
Okay. About 15. And so it's interesting, like at 15 years old, what was your mindset about what you wanted to do and what result you wanted to get out of that sort of advocacy event?
I think I was really in the mindset that the more people who know about this, the more you can build behind the movement, the more momentum you have, and the more likely that you can actually create the shift to stop something like dolphin hunting. So for me, it was, I'm outraged by seeing this, and I want to do something about it. So the more people who also get that feeling, the more likely we can create change. So I think that's why I was really motivated to put on a screening of the Cove at my school, and much later when I'm working this Action for Dolphins the Cove had been out for a while by then, but to show documentaries like the Cove and Blackfish, and just reach into people's hearts to say, we can all do something about this if we've got the knowledge of what's going on.
I love that aspect. I think awareness is such a huge first step in getting people to sort of care about a problem. And documentaries like the Cove and Blackfish have been very successful in making people aware all over the world, by people like yourselves who would just be like, this is ridiculous. How can we let this happen? And then you start to rally the people around and get more and more people aware. I love that aspect. So throughout your university career, as you're following international and global studies and media and communications, was it always an ocean focus? Like, did you focus always on oceans or dolphins when you did your projects, or if you got to study your own or choose your own projects and things like that? Was that the focus always?
I think I would bring it back to dolphins or the ocean as much as possible in my assignments, but I was also going out there and learning just about the world in general. So as part of my bachelor degree, I went and lived in Mexico for a year as part of my exchange year. And when I was there, I went scuba diving. I learned how to scuba dive, and I did as many snorkeling trips, which is just absolutely incredible over there, and saw whale sharks and whales and turtles and dolphins, and swam with wild dolphins in the middle of the ocean, just jumped off a boat and had these incredible just life experiences, very much to do with the ocean, but also just in general that I could then apply to my career later on.
Now, when you first got out of university, you first graduated, did you know about Action for Dolphins, or did that happen a little later in your career?
I found out about Action for Dolphins when I was doing my postgraduate, which was in global media communication. So
Gotcha.
As I was saying, I moved cities from Sydney to Melbourne and looked up basically just any Australian, specifically dolphin protection charity, and we're probably one of the only ones. So found out about Action for Dolphins and asked if I could just volunteer and help out.
Okay. And what was it about? I mean, obviously one of the only ones one of those organizations in Melbourne, but What was it about that organization that kept you staying and kept you, like, you're working, you're volunteering there. And that's a big ask, right? When you're volunteering there. Was that like a full-time volunteership, or was it more like part-time and you can work a job at the same time?
It was 2 days a week, so I was
Okay.
studying the rest of the time and
Right.
volunteering. Yeah.
Okay. So that's cool. So it's not as if you were like had to work full-time just to kind of subsidize the volunteering. But what kept you coming back to that organization and kept working there? What was it about that particular organization that you like so much?
I think it was two things. Type, I loved the way that Action for Dolphins was tackling these issues. So it was pairing
Mm-hmm.
that really important raising awareness, advocacy, meeting with politicians, putting up billboards, putting up ads to get people behind this and get the attention of decision makers, but then also using the strategic legal action route to achieve our mission.
Right.
And then the second part of it was the people. I got along extremely well with my colleagues and felt really inspired by them, and propped up by them as well to keep
Gotcha.
working on my skills and learning
Yeah.
more and more about the organization. There's so many parts of an organization. There's the comms, but there's also the campaigns, and there's also just how to actually run it as a business. So the
Yeah.
longer I stayed there, the more I got to learn, and that really, as long as you're continuously challenged, it's really hard
Yeah.
to think about moving on. So I've ended up staying with Action for Dolphins for 6.5 years now.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And so how did you get the role of CEO? I mean, that's not something that comes around every day. How did that transpire?
So our founder, Sarah, was moving on. She wasn't going to be working full time with Action for Dolphins anymore. She's still heavily involved on the board, but
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't going to be working day by day. And they were looking at who would be the best person to take on actually running the organization. And while I didn't have CEO experience, I didn't have experience running an organization, but I knew and lived and breathed Action for Dolphins. So I
Right.
had even known that, I look back on my previous diary entries from before I took on the role, and I was even starting to write out some of the things that I would like to see change, or that if I was in that leadership position, what I could start to do. And so
Right.
I think our founder and my bosses at the time sort of maybe recognized something in me that I probably wouldn't have even had the confidence to vouch for myself. And they said, we actually think that given your experience with the organization, you'd be a good person to take on the role. So it was a huge challenge, but it was well worth it. And I'm really proud of where Action for Dolphins is now.
That's fantastic. So what was the biggest challenge? Because like you said, it's not every day that someone without CEO background becomes a CEO. What was the biggest challenge in coming into that role, other than trying to fill the shoes of the person beforehand? What did you find was so challenging about that?
Well, I think the challenge was mainly, this all happened at the beginning of 2021. So it was almost just the mental, when I reflect back on it, it was the challenge of staying afloat just mentally, I think, because we were all in lockdown for 2021. And it was a tough year just in general. And then I was also going through this huge transition with my career. But what I stayed so focused on, and which I think what helped me get through it, is that we exist for our mission to prevent dolphin suffering. And as long as I stayed true to that mission and made sure that out of anything, our campaigns were never being sacrificed, then that really was able to, push through those kind of pain barriers of learning and growing pains.
Gotcha. I love that. I like that attitude. Is just keep that mission in front of you, right? And be able to say, hey, look, dolphins are going through suffering. We gotta relieve that suffering somehow. Let's just continue on and straight. Because I remember hearing, Canada was in lockdown for quite a long time, but Australia I felt was like in and out of lockdown like stringent. You'd be allowed out for a little bit, then back down, allowed out. Yeah. So that must have been very, very difficult to kind of navigate,
Yeah, I think
especially from an advocacy position.
I think Melbourne was the most locked down city in the
Yeah.
world. Um, so, just general life, mental health, keeping your head above
Oh
water.
yeah.
But
Hmm.
it was all well worth it in the end, because at the same time I was also able to focus really heavily on my job at the time.
Yeah, no, I love that. And CEO, as CEO, you do wear a lot of hats as CEO. You obviously have the communications down pat, so you're able to communicate very well. But there's a lot of behind the scenes, the business aspect of the organization, which I think when people start a nonprofit organization or hear about a nonprofit organization, you don't think it's a business, but you have to run it like a business, just in a different way. And constantly looking for funding and so forth. And then of course you're managing a team. How big is the team right now? When we talk about this point.
Yeah, so our team is 5 at the moment.
Okay.
And we have someone who works as a campaigner over in Japan. And then we have 4 of us here in Melbourne.
So it's 4 in Melbourne, 1 over in Japan to
Yeah.
do that work in Japan. Okay, that's really interesting. How did that work? Let's start getting into the programs, especially with the work over in Japan and Taiji. How did that person come to work with Action for Dolphins? How did that relationship develop?
Yeah, so he's actually a journalist in Japan, and he became involved with us through writing about one of our campaigns. And
Oh,
then
okay.
him and I got in discussions about some of the work he wanted to do next, and he was able to jump on board.
Now let's talk about that program, because the Cove comes out, people are angry, people are infuriated by what's going on. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of hopelessness that happens when you watch a movie like that. At the end of the movie, I think before we recorded, I was like, I didn't even watch the ending because I was so angry about it. And when you have that pessimistic view of a situation that's happening across the world, for us, for Canada, but just for you, just north of you, but it's in a different country, so you don't feel like you have a lot of things that you can do other than do protests like you did, and make other people aware. Why was this program why was it designed, and what were you hoping? What was the organization hoping to get out of the actions that you're taking, and what kind of actions would you take?
Yeah, so Action for Dolphins has quite an interesting history with fighting the Taiji dolphin hunt. So in 2015, we brought a legal action. I guess to start at the beginning, we would look at ways that we could creatively impact the economic viability of hunting dolphins in Taiji. So
Okay.
in 2015, we brought a legal action against the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And we
Okay.
argued that it's against their own regulations to have aquariums in the association who are buying their dolphins from the hunts, because it goes against
Right.
their own cruelty regulations. Off the back of that, the World Association suspended the Japanese Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and in order to get back into the World Association, they would need to cut ties with Taiji. So 62 aquariums at that time said, we're no longer going to import or buy dolphins from the hunts. And that was a huge,
Wow.
huge win, because nothing like that had ever happened before at that scale of that impact.
Yeah.
So we're always looking for ways to replicate a similar type of action to that. And we brought another big legal action in 2019, which was targeting the permit that allows the hunts to go ahead. And that was under we were trying to fight it under animal cruelty laws in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And that case was thrown out on legal standing. So at the beginning of 2019, we sort of sat down, we're like, where can we go? Animal welfare angle's not working. And then we started looking more and more, and this is where the science comes in around the high levels of mercury in dolphin meat. They actually talk about that in the Cove, but we'd never gone there before. So we decided, okay, let's tackle the economic driver of the hunts is to slaughter dolphins for meat for human consumption. Dolphin meat has high levels of mercury. What can we do using the legal system and advocacy around high levels of mercury in dolphin meat? So in 2020, at the very end of 2020, we submitted a criminal complaint to the Wakayama Prefectural Police against a Taiji fishermen's co-op who sold dolphin meat with high levels of mercury. The result of that police investigation was that the prosecutor's office decided not to indict the fishermen. But we got a lot of media around it at the time, and we decided to replicate that with a different supplier earlier this year. So in April this year, we submitted another criminal complaint with a different prefectural police against a Taiji dolphin meat supplier who was selling online via Yahoo Japan. And we just a few weeks ago found out that supplier has now ceased their sales online on Yahoo Japan. And as far as we can tell, their website is down, their Instagram's no longer operational. Oh, sorry, it's the other way around. Their website is no longer operational and their Instagram is down. So we believe their online sales have ceased altogether, and that as a result of that action, that key point of sale for Taiji dolphin meat has been shut down.
That's insane. That's awesome. Congratulations. So now, did they see the criminal complaint and then just say to the court, we're just going to take down our online orders and not have an online store? Or did the criminal complaint, did it go through, they got convicted and they had to?
The police investigation is still underway. So we're not privy to a lot of the details of the police investigation.
Of course.
All we can do is essentially we can assume that we brought a legal action in April 2022. We brought a legal action in April this year, and just over a month later, they weren't selling online anymore. These kind of, it might feel sort of like a small win along the way, but those kind of wins can be few and far between in this conservation world that we're all living in and that we all 100%. Work towards. So yeah, it's been a huge win to see some movement.
Yeah, and just even going back to the association, I don't think people realize who the people who aren't in conservation and advocacy and stuff. I don't think people realize how important those associations are to be a part of. Like, a lot of aquarium and zoos like to be a part of those associations because it brings them a reputation. Yeah. And if they are ousted or suspended from that because of a specific process or where they get their animals, they're going to react. And we've seen that in fisheries. We've seen that in international sort of relations within fisheries, especially with China trying to be part of like these not societies, I say, or associations, but some kind of type of partnership. And so it was really interesting to hear that, was it 62? Was that the number? Zoos and aquariums just said, hey, yeah, we're divesting our need for Taiji. That's a huge blow to Taiji, I'm sure. And it's a big win. It's a really big win for a lot of people, especially to have it in a different country. You have to go over those international organizations and start putting pressure on them to be like, we need you guys to stand up for these dolphins. And like you said before, a lot of these battles are not won. They're few and far between that are won. And so you have to celebrate the ones that you have, and you have to take the punches on the other ones and come back with something new, just like this criminal complaint that was a bit of an adaptation from a previous one. When you talk about the criminal complaint, do you have someone within Japan, like a law firm in Japan that produces that criminal complaint?
Yeah, so we worked with a law firm in Tokyo who put together the complaint for us. Anyone can bring a criminal complaint, so it was on behalf of Action for Dolphins, but we it was filed on behalf of us by the law firm, and they were able to. We argued in the criminal complaint that the selling of dolphin meat with high levels, and we did some mercury testing to complement the complaint, or to go into the complaint, and the most recent one we found had 97.5 times the mercury levels.
97?
Yeah, sorry, I'll phrase it in a better way. It had 97.5 times the mercury levels that are considered safe for human consumption under Japanese food regulation.
Holy cow.
Huge.
I've never heard of that before. That is massive.
It was by far the biggest weed. We've tested a few samples for our criminal complaints, and the one we had in 2021, it was 25 times. So still huge, but this one was so high, such high levels of mercury. And so the complaint argued that the selling of that meat violated food sanitation laws in Japan.
Yeah, I bet. Jeez. Now, are those lethal doses, or it can cause harm?
Yeah, not lethal in and of itself, but we argued that especially the continual ingestion of meat with such high levels of mercury, it can be toxic. And the issue with it being sold online as well, there's no health warning on it. And so at particular risk of pregnant women, because it can cause harm to unborn babies. So, the fact that it's just sold online to anyone without any health warnings or regulations is also something that we put in the complaint.
Now, moving on to another program that you have, which is the Taiji thing is amazing, what you've been able to accomplish. That's awesome. Now, going on to the dolphins in captivity, here in the U.S. or in the U.S., like in North America, I should say, Canada, U.S., we've seen some policies and regulations that have been put into place that ban, taking any marine mammals from the ocean. And we've also seen some progress in aquariums and theme parks starting to give up dolphins. Not necessarily orcas, but dolphins. And obviously, Blackfish was focused on orcas. And I feel like, dolphins got ignored a little bit, in that, obviously, because it's about an orca. But when we talk about captivity, not a lot of people talk about dolphins in captivity, which, you could argue have very similar sensitivities, very similar sort of trauma that they go through, in these cages, or in these small aquariums. And so, but we are seeing, some organizations, some aquariums actually releasing them. They've gone through pilot programs, or they've actually released them into specific areas and kept an eye on them. What is the status in Australia, or just in that area, like the Oceania area of the world, in terms of captivity and dolphins? Where are we at in that respect?
Yeah, so our captivity campaigns have been mainly focused so far in Australia. We are looking at the connection between Taiji and wild dolphins being transferred to Thailand. But just to focus on Australia for a minute, you can't take dolphins from the wild and put them into marine parks in Australia, but you can. Up until recently, and this was another one of our huge campaign wins, at the 2 marine parks with captive dolphins left in Australia, you can breed dolphins. So we worked with one of the marine parks in New South Wales on a campaign to move their dolphins. They agreed to move their dolphins to a sanctuary if we can show it's viable through a feasibility study. And throughout that process, the park also said publicly they were no longer going to breed their dolphins. And then there was a parliamentary inquiry into the exhibiting of cetaceans in the state of New South Wales. And I gave evidence in that inquiry to the effect that this park may not be breeding dolphins, but let's legislate it so that no parks that open in the future will ever breed dolphins. And they did change the law to that effect so that you can no longer breed dolphins in captivity in the state. And we're still working with this marine park to move their dolphins to a sanctuary. if it's possible. It's been difficult, to be honest, to get government backing behind a project like this. And I think that's what a lot of sanctuary projects around the world also struggle with, because if we were to build it, it's expensive, basically.
Yes.
But we also have with this campaign, our eyes are on SeaWorld, which is actually not connected to SeaWorld in the US. It's Sea Space World. They're owned by a huge entertainment company, though, Village Roadshow, and they still have an active breeding program. So we're also campaigning for them to end the breeding of their dolphins, so that we can have the last generation as the last in captivity in this country.
Gotcha. That's been a big thing to ban the breeding, because I know from Blackfish, SeaWorld made a lot of money off of breeding their orcas. I don't remember if they did dolphins. Do you remember if they did dolphins as well?
SeaWorld?
Yeah, like SeaWorld here in North America.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, they would have a breeding program.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. And that was a big thing. Even in Canada, that got banned as well. To make sure, like as you mentioned, sometimes it's the loopholes. You can't take wild dolphins and put them in marine theme parks, but if you breed them and they're born in marine theme parks, you can argue that they wouldn't be able to be released in the wild, because they were born in it. They were never born in the wild. They don't know what it's like. It can be, it's one of those loopholes where you're like, oh, okay, so now you have to ban the breeding, which I think is a really important thing. How did it make you feel knowing that your testimony helped change the law in Australia, or at least in New South Wales?
It was definitely one of those moments where you just sit back and I guess because that was 5 years into working on this issue and almost working full time that whole time. So it almost felt surreal in a way when you can get a win that huge. And, it's not just Action for Dolphins. It wasn't just me. It was all the other conservation groups and animal welfare groups in Australia, but it was also everyone who's ever donated to help stop dolphin captivity and everyone who's ever signed a petition. So it felt like a huge shift for the whole movement. And it really, to be able to say there's only one place left in Australia that will breed their dolphins for entertainment is a huge win. And I had to take stock and think. I'm actually really proud of the work Action for Dolphins is a small organization, but we were up there with the huge animal welfare organization speaking at this inquiry because of the work we'd done. So it was really taking stock and saying, I'm proud of what we've achieved, and I'm also just so happy that there are so many incredible people behind us in order to make it happen.
Yeah, for sure. It's a huge win. And so you talk about the work that you did up to that point. So for the campaigns that you ran for Action for Dolphins, for Dolphins in Captivity, what can you kind of just name a couple of those campaigns, or just describe me one of those campaigns that led up to sort of you or Action for Dolphins being represented in Parliament?
Yeah, so we brought a legal action under consumer law against the marine park housing captive dolphins around misleading conduct, advertising their dolphins are happy and healthy, and we challenged that legally.
Right. You can't tell that.
Yeah, and so that was one part of the campaign. And then the second was to start working on the sanctuary project and the feasibility study that I mentioned earlier. Also, there was a big raising awareness component of the campaign for people. As you say, Blackfish was a huge shift for captivity in general, but it did focus mainly on orcas. So it was translating that, essentially, as you said, the same message that these animals are suffering in these environments to as many people as possible in Australia, and changing hearts and minds so that people can make change by voting with their feet, so to speak, and not going and attending these marine parks.
100%. I think that's the one thing. I mean, Cove did it to a certain degree, but I don't remember how much it did. I remember Blackfish really changing the minds of people, where they stopped going to the marine. A lot of people stopped going to the marine parks to say, we want this to change. It really changed the minds of millions of people, which you think like a short, documentary, small, wasn't like it was big production or anything. And it received a lot of criticism from sort of the pro captivity world for marine mammals. But it definitely got a lot of support and made people aware of the difficulties, I should say, of captivity, and sort of that experiment needs to stop. We tried it. It didn't work. It never really worked, but we were stubborn in our change, and now that we know, we're starting to see more changes. But also using that fire in people's bellies, just like, probably the same how you felt during the Cove, and I'm sure you felt the same way after watching Blackfish, and using that sort of that, I'm ready to take a call to action. I feel like people were ready to do something. They just didn't know what. Like, we could stop going to the marine theme parks. That's okay. But what else do we need to do? Like, we really have to stop this kind of thing. I feel like those movies, those documentaries really, put that fire under their butts, under the people's butts, and be like, no, we really need to do something about these. And I guess it's, marine mammals have always had a special place in our hearts, for advocacy and trying to change things. But I felt that. And so I guess like Action for Dolphins, you took that, and it was, you had that support to the campaigns, I guess, were even more successful, I would imagine, right? It's less convincing, I guess, when you're making people aware.
Yeah, I think so, because the bottlenose dolphin are the main species that are kept in captivity in Australia, and they have the natural curve of their faces, so they look as though they're always smiling, so people might assume they're being kept in these small environments, enclosed spaces, and they're still perfectly happy and having a great time jumping around. So it was just debunking some of the myths around how these animals are coping in these restricted environments. And also a big part of the way that I've always spoken about seeing dolphins in captivity in the Australian context in particular is that we are surrounded by coastline, and we're surrounded by the ocean, and you can go out on the beach. And for the example of SeaWorld is on the Gold Coast in Australia, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard of. Surfers Paradise, and you can go out, stand on the sand. You don't even need to go in the water, and you can see dolphins playing in the waves. You don't need to see these animals in their restricted environments in marine parks. So I've always thought, just go out on a boat or go out on a surfboard or sit on the sand, and you might get lucky enough to see these incredible animals in their environment where they belong, with their pods, having a genuine great time playing through the waves.
It's I'm sure a sight to be seen. And you're right. There are probably, and I'm sure there are ecotourist area companies too that will take you out to see those dolphins as well, to get a bit of a closer look and see a little bit of their behavior in a safe way,
exactly.
hopefully.
Yeah,
right?
on their terms, and yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and you get to see how far and how fast they are, in the sort of the wide ocean where there's no boundaries for them, and they're able to go pretty much wherever they want. It's quite the sight when you watch a bunch of dolphins, a pod of dolphins bow ride the boat that you're on. It's a lot of fun. The amount of the agility that they have and the reflexes that they have is just, it's surreal to see. Now, speaking of boundaries in the ocean, it goes to another one. I think probably what we'll talk about is the shark nets that are found in certain places around Australia, and I know they're controversial in Australia and around the world, putting up shark nets to protect beachgoers from sharks coming into populated beaches. Can you just talk about those shark nets? Because I don't know that much about them other than what I see on TV or on media. Can you just talk about why the shark nets are put in, or when they're put in certain areas?
Yeah, so I think you pointed out actually a really key misconception with shark nets. They're not boundaries, they're not barriers, they're not enclosed. So they're 150 meters long and 6 meters deep, usually out past the breakers at popular beaches in New South Wales and in Queensland, so in 2 states in Australia. And they're essentially free floating fishing gear that capture anything and everything that swims through, tries to swim through them or near them. So they capture turtles, they capture dolphins, they capture gummy sharks, they capture rays, they capture whales. And a tiny percentage of what they capture are the so-called target species of sharks. And the other key misconception is that they protect people, because scientific studies here in Australia have shown that they're not protecting swimmers. We have non-lethal alternatives such as drones and aerial surveillance and shark listening stations, etc., that can alert swimmers to a potentially dangerous shark nearby, but without harming all of the other marine life in the ocean, or having the potential to harm marine life. So they are in the water all year round up in Queensland, which is a huge issue for the whale migration season. I know it's made the news over in the UK recently, all the way from Australia, with a horrible whale entanglement. The whales can be struggling for up to hours. It's really brutal. It's really unnecessary.
And they're struggling for air, essentially, right? Is like, because they can't get up for air.
Yeah.
They essentially drown.
Yeah, they're drowning in their own home. And you can see, if you look at the footage of the rays, or there was one particularly horrific one of a dolphin recently where they're just completely wrapped up in the net, and they've been struggling for hours. And that this particular dolphin was apparently pregnant. And we're losing these beautiful, beautiful animals for the sake of public perception of safety. And so the more, and this is where education is so key, because the more people understand that they're not barriers, then you're still potentially dangerous sharks can still swim in or around, or sorry, not in, but around the nets. Then I think most people come around and say, yeah, there's no point in having these in the water. Let's put something in, or let's use something in the air that can help protect swimmers more effectively. I mean, these shark nets in Australia were first put in the 1930s. And you think about how far technology has come in the almost 100 years since, and we're still using that same technology in the ocean. And it just decimates marine life. The pictures, the stats, it's all awful. So that's shark net.
It's like putting a gill net, like a fishing device in there to catch whatever swims by and or into it. And it's I mean, we've already, a lot of places have banned gill nets because of that. To think that a shark net would only keep out sharks, in quotations, it just doesn't make sense to me. Like you said, there's so many other better ways of looking after people and making sure that they're safe, using drones, technology, helicopters, even like lifeguards have that now, and especially in developed countries. And there's ways around it, and there's better ways to do that surveillance. So it makes it's really disheartening to see that. From what I see, it seems like it's always politicians with a knee-jerk reaction to say, look, this is what we're doing, so we're putting in these shark nets. And you see in my social media feeds anyway, and maybe it's probably biased towards more of the conservation, but you see a lot of people who are angry and frustrated that this is the same action over and over again. I do believe that awareness to the public is a huge thing. How do Action for Dolphins, I guess, contact the public? Is it through social media campaigns? Is it through email campaigns, in-person events? How do you make people aware? What's your communication strategy from the communications person, the one that has a postgraduate degree in communications?
Yeah, so we mainly focus, especially now in recent years with the way the world's moving, we mainly focus on digital advocacy, so raising awareness digitally. So yeah, as you say, through social media. We have an email newsletter that people can subscribe to and hear the latest news on what we're up to and what's happening. And we try to keep those as positive as possible as well, with good news every few months, and good news roundup. So yeah, that's the main way we'll reach people. In the past, we have used more traditional forms of media. So we've put up billboards, and we recently ran some ads on the ferry in Sydney. But we find that we can reach people who are more likely to be actually interested in the issue using digital spaces, and then building the movement behind it from there.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. I mean, now it's easier to get messages out. Do you direct certain campaigns towards, people in Australia? Because I know now, campaigns can go worldwide very easily. How do you make sure you're targeting people within the area or within the country?
Well, our supporter base is actually global. So we have a lot.
Oh, cool.
We have quite a few supporters in Canada, actually. And
I would bet.
Also in the US. And we find that even if we're talking about one of our campaigns of feeding wild dolphins in a particular part of Australia where it mainly affects that specific population of dolphins, people around the world still get behind it because they still want to help protect these animals, sort of regardless of where they are. As we said before, people love dolphins. They're an incredible hero animal. And of course, why wouldn't you? They're
amazing, amazing animals.
They're such incredible animals. So yeah, we find that our campaigns are supported globally. And that is incredible for us because we can reach more people than if we were just focusing on Australia.
Now, as a nonprofit organization, you get donations and you probably go for grants. Where's most of your funding coming from?
We're primarily funded through private donors who will give one-offs or regular gifts.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've got an incredible base of supporters and people who will give monthly to keep us running on a day-by-day basis and to keep up our campaigns regularly. And then we'll do fundraising drives for particular campaigns. And then we can also partner with larger organizations, or we'll always be applying for grants with large organizations or companies as well. But we do find that there's just this incredible group of people around the world who want to see us continue to work on dolphin protection and continue with our campaign, so they'll support us.
And I was just, as you were saying that, I was just perusing through the website one last time for this interview, and on the bottom of the page it has, I think actually on the top too, it says take action. Where people can take action and either donate or sign petitions or just help with dolphins in general. Highly recommend that you take a look at this, the website. Very nice website. Lots of great imagery and videos of dolphins, and then just information on what you all do, on a day-to-day basis as an organization, and looking at taking action and looking at some of the wins and some of the challenges that the organization faces and that these dolphins face in the future. So, Hannah, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your organization and what you do. And I'll put the links that you gave me. If there's any more that you want me to put on, I'll put it in the show notes so that people can check it out. There's an Instagram page. There's a website. I highly recommend that you do it, whether you're from Australia or not. As Hannah mentioned, it's worldwide based, so you can support them in any way that you can. That would be wonderful. Again, Hannah, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing what you guys do. It's awesome.
Thanks, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Hannah, for joining us on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Looking forward to having you on again. This was amazing to kind of hear about, how the story started with one documentary, The Cove. After watching that documentary, I was extremely depressed and I felt helpless. I felt like, how am I going to do something, where this is taking place in a different country, where I don't know the laws, I don't know the regulations, I don't know really how the government works. How can I do that? How can we start to, influence another country or people in another country to be able to take action to reduce the amount of catch that comes out of Taiji, or even the dolphin captivity that comes out of Taiji. And here you see, one woman who, as a young woman in high school, watches a film on a documentary in school, and then starts to take action, by putting together an awareness campaign for her school, then going into university, talking about communications, and always trying to get back into conservation. Doing so through a volunteership, volunteering for a couple of years, which has got to be difficult on the financial tool belt there. And then she gets a job. And then not only does she get a job, a bunch of years later, she becomes a CEO. It just goes to show the dedication that Hannah has and the dedication that people can have to really take action. This is unreal. This is what we need more of, the Hannahs in the world. And to be able to work for an organization and lead an organization like Action for Dolphins, to have influences, and not only just try to influence government or try to influence a different culture, which is very difficult to do, but get into the associations where zoos and aquariums want to be a part of, and they can't be a part of if they support or have any kind of marine mammal captivity in there. Genius. Absolute genius. Just by making great connections, having people in those countries to be able to say, hey, this is an avenue that you can go to, maybe an inside track, I don't know, right? But the people in the country of origin, or in the country of, where the issue is going on, taking place, like Japan, it's nice to have someone on the inside to be like, hey, this is what's happening, and this is what you can get the inside information, and you can do stuff from there. And this is public information, but you wouldn't know if you didn't live in Japan, if you didn't have people in Japan. Now this organization is expanding. It's covering global issues because dolphins are global. They are everywhere. And they have an audience from all over the world. This is how you lead an organization. This is how you build an organization, right? To have an effect, to have a positive effect on the ocean. And I just absolutely love it. And I hope that they're able to continue and have the exact same success, and have more success, actually. I hope they have more success in the future. This is something that I love to see, and I love to share these stories. And to be honest, I'm kind of patting myself on the back a little bit, because people who, Hannah signed up to be a part of this interview. Normally I would reach out to people and say, hey, I would love to have you on the podcast to be a part of the interview. But I can't see everybody. And people who listen to the podcast and are living these stories that I wanted to tell on this platform, or I want to share on this platform, are now able to, connect with me, and I'm able to talk about these organizations and these projects that are happening all over the world. I love this job. This is what I love to do. This is an amazing part of my work and sort of my mission, and I love it. And so I love to tell these stories. I hope you enjoy listening to these stories. If you have any questions or comments about this episode or any other episode, you can get a hold of me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. And by the way, I know Threads is now a thing. The competition to Twitter, Meta's competition to Twitter, it's linked through Instagram. So if you want to hit me up on Threads, you can do so at the same username, at How to Protect the Ocean, all one word. Hit me up there or DM me on Instagram. I would love to chat with you, love to interact with you, and love to know how you feel about this episode and Action for Dolphins. Other than that, I want to thank you so much. If you want to join the Build Your Marine Conservation and Build Your Marine Science and Conservation program, the private podcast, you can do so. All you have to do is go speakupforblue.com/career. That's speakupforblue.com/career. You can get into the program, get access to 25 episodes. I'm excited. This episode just made me super, super excited. So I'm excited to talk to you, to get you into that program, to get you to do more things like Hannah or similar, or in the topic that you'd love to do. So let's talk about that at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram or Threads. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.